All right, here we go. It's time for another video. Today, as you can tell from the title of the slide here, and no doubt the video itself, we're going to be talking about the Masoretic Text. Specifically, we're going to be comparing it to the Septuagint and the Dead Sea Scrolls. And if none of that really makes any sense to you, if you're not familiar with what the Masoretic Text or the Septuagint or the Dead Sea Scrolls are, don't worry about it. We're going to cover it. We're going to get into, I guess, a basic overview of it. And what we're going to do is we're going to compare some scriptures. And, like the title says, we're going to look into the Masoretic Text. I really kind of feel pushed. I mean, this is something that I started to look into, I don't know, 2, 3, 4 years ago, and really started to pique my interest because as I was getting deeper into my Bible study, I was running into some things that didn't make any sense, and that's what kind of pushed me to look into things even farther, down the road than that. In the past, I started to find some things in my studies that made me desire to want to know or to study the Hebrew so that I can, see for myself, what the text actually says. And I'm still a far cry from being able to do that. But, here I am sometimes later, I can read it, and I can see things that I couldn't see before. But there was a drive in me to learn Hebrew because, not so much a distrust, but, here I was looking and reading the words of these translators that I had no idea who they were. And, I found some things that, other people translated in other ways. And I'm like, so what's what? I used to think that the Bible was just the Bible. And, if there were any changes in the translations or whatever, between the King James, the ESV, were, more modern, language, or just various different ways of saying the same thing. But there's a whole lot more nuance to that. It's more than just, how does this person translate this versus this person? And, you may be shocked to find that, there are many different manuscripts, and they don't all agree. And so I started to look at something called textual criticism. And for those of you that don't know about that, I'm going to explain a little bit more about textual criticism. But just understand that even though it's got the name or the word criticism in it, it doesn't necessarily mean anything negative. It's critical in the fact that they're looking at various sources of text, manuscripts, and the end goal is to find the original. And one thing I want to make sure to explain right here at the beginning is, majority, it does not necessarily equal the original meaning. And what I mean by that is, say you have, 10 versions or 10 manuscripts, or, versions of a particular verse, and 6 of them say one thing, whereas, you've got 1 of another and 3 of another. The 6 does not necessarily mean that it's the more original version. And the reason is obviously you can have a mistake early on, and then the mistake is what is copied over and over and over and over again. In textual criticism, they have rules that they go by, to determine, I guess, a best guess on what they believe to be the original. and they will cross-reference various different things, and that's some of the stuff that we're going to get into today. But on a personal note, I wanted to say that this is kind of it's been something that I've been studying for a few years, but here recently I feel the importance of getting this thing out a little bit more, because in my own personal circles, there are people that I know and care about that have gone the way of atheism. They've turned their back on their faith altogether, or there's some that still say that they are Christians, or that they believe in God. However, their view of the scriptures has taken quite the hit, in that they believe it's more of a man-made text rather than something that was ordained by God and blessed, so that we may know more about the story of the Creator and His plan for mankind. And I can only assume and make assumptions. My screen keeps going dim. I'm trying to make sure it doesn't go black on me, but I can only assume when people say that they believe that the Bible is man-made, then they're questioning the validity and the inerrancy of the Bible. And some of these people I've come into contact with, and I've started to share, kind of not really knowing at the time where they were in their walk, but I've shared some of these things with them, and I'm afraid that I may have fueled a fire. And I just want to say right off the bat that my intention in this is not to be negative or to bring the Bible in any kind of bad light. I am a Bible believer, 100%, cover to cover. I don't believe that there are contradictions. I believe that, where there seem to be some issues, it's always going to be explained away with textual variances and things, or variants and things like that. So I won't get too much into it. Just understand right off the bat that I am a huge fan of the Bible, and will continue to be. And in fact, this particular study has just, not only has it opened my eyes to so many things that I wasn't aware of before, it has not weakened, my trust in the Word, but if anything, I believe it's strengthened it, because I've just learned so much. And if you're watching this and this is old news, and I seem to be hitting it at a pretty low level here. Most of the people that I come into contact with will know nothing about the stuff that I'm going to talk about here. So this is kind of geared more toward them. This is also, so in my own personal studies, this study has kind of springboarded me into something else, and I'm going to have a second video at some point, I hope relatively soon, and it may seem that it's not related at all, but in my eyes, they like I said, I went from one to another, and this was kind of the segue to that. And I believe that both of these are important for the day that we're in, where, you've got, like I said, atheism and progressive Christianity seemingly on such a rise, where people, because they don't believe in the absolutes in the Bible, because, the Bible is just a man-made document, they're just kind of going by what they think is right. And you know, we know from the book of Judges that that's a bad thing, because people continue to do what they thought was right in their own eyes, and they just continued to get themselves in more and more trouble. But yeah, let's start off with some of these quotes here. I want to try to be concise, and I want to be quick, because I don't want this video to last very long. I've given a 10-minute introduction, so we're already behind it here. So looking into the Masoretic Text, like I said, it's pretty self-explanatory. We're going to look at the Septuagint. We're going to figure out what these documents are, what these manuscripts are, and also talk about the Dead Sea Scrolls. So one of the things that I wanted to show is this particular book that I've gotten called Textual Criticism, Recovering the Text of the Hebrew Bible, by this particular gentleman here. He gives a pretty good explanation, and I think I gave a little bit of what I used to say. Basically, I would just tell people it's a process by which scholars look at various manuscripts to figure out what the original is. But I like his definition here. A textual criticism is an enterprise that has as its objective the enhancement of the integrity of a text. So I like that, because what they're talking about is they're trying to enhance, make greater the integrity, the trustworthiness of a text. And it's based on the study of the extant or the existing copies of the text. And again, this is referring to biblical textual criticism. The critic, this definition is wide. I'm just saying that we're talking about biblical manuscripts or biblical copies. The critic compares these copies and attempts to draw conclusions about the divergences between them, where they separate, where they're different. The goal is the recovery of an earlier, more authentic, and therefore superior form of the text. So, like he says, the goal is to try to find the oldest, and therefore probably the more original and therefore superior form of the text. I think that's enough of that one. There's another quote here, and obviously throughout this discussion, through this video, some of my thoughts and feelings about particular things are going to become evident. But I wanted to throw this in there anyway, about the textual critic, I guess, if you can call it that. And what he says here, this is just the same guy, a few pages down. There are modern biblical scholars who prefer the reading of the Masoretic Text, and again, we're going to get to what that is here in a minute, regardless of the scientific merit. And there are others who seem ready to embrace any reading that disagrees with the Masoretic Text, regardless of its merit. And there are those who will defend any reading that supports their theories or the theories of their teachers, and there are those who will reject any reading that supports the theories of their rivals. All of these scholars, in one way or another, are all prejudiced, and they cannot hope to produce enduring critical work. So, I'm not trying to produce enduring critical work necessarily. What I'm trying to do is show some things about the Masoretic Text that the common churchgoer would not be aware of. And like I said, not to point or to denigrate any particular Bible version or anything like that, but the more we know, the better off we are, right? So let's see here. All right, so I'm going to transition. I've got some notes here. I'm going to go back and forth, and hopefully this kind of flows really well here. But what I've done is I've just drawn some things up here, and it's an attempt to explain what these particular manuscripts are, what these are pertaining to the Bible. All right, so at the very bottom, I've got kind of a timeline, and this is, like I said, just kind of thrown together, so it's not even attempting to be in any kind of a scale or anything like that, but there's a few things that I want to talk about. And so on your far right over here, we have the SP, and that's the Samaritan Pentateuch. And what that is that's the Torah, the first five books of Moses, and it is maintained by the Samaritans to be, their version of the first five books of Moses, the Torah. It does differ slightly. I say slightly, I don't know to what percentage or anything like that, but it does differ from the Pentateuch or the Torah that we're familiar with. And I want to just say that this was supposed to have been developed or written around the 12th century, and this is BCE or AD. Okay, us old people will go more with AD. But they are basically the same thing. This is in the year of our Lord, Anno Domini, I think it is, and this is before the Common Era. I'm sorry, not BCE, Common Era, CE. This is the Masoretic Text, and the Masoretic Text is the what is widely believed, especially by Judaism, to be the authentic, or maybe not authentic, but the authoritative version of Hebrew. And a lot of our Bible versions, especially the older Bible versions, they solely use the Masoretic Text. And one of the big ones there is the KJV, because it was written and I guess published in 1611. And it's the 10th century, okay? And again, this is CE AD. This line down the middle here, this is meant to represent 0. So just a heads up. Then over here we have the LXX, and the LXX is just a shorthand version of saying the Septuagint. The Septuagint is the Greek translation of the Hebrew, of some Hebrew that existed, obviously before the Septuagint, so centuries BCE, before the Common Era. But yeah, this was done by, the reason it's called LXX, or the Septuagint, which is 70, is because it's supposed to have been translated by 70 Jewish scholars, and that's another thing to keep in mind. This is written by Jewish scholars, okay, in about the anywhere from the 4th to the 3rd century BCE, or BC, before Christ. Then you've got the Dead Sea Scrolls, the DSS, and it's roughly the same time frame. I've got this line written out here because it's, compiled of documents that could be anywhere from the 3rd century BCE to the 1st century CE. And one thing to understand is this is not just Hebrew documents. These are also Greek and Aramaic documents, and they're not just biblical. There are a lot of other documents in there that are not from the canon that most of Christianity goes by today, which, by the way, is different. So Protestant and a majority of Christians in the United States hold to a 66 book canon. There are other books that were considered to be, the Bible, and those are also contained in the Dead Sea Scrolls. There are commentaries. There are all kinds of things in the Dead Sea Scrolls. But another thing to understand here is this Hebrew that the Septuagint was written on, it does not exist anymore. It's what they say is no longer extant. It is gone, and we have, the best of my understanding, no idea when that was written or developed or anything like that, or compiled. But we know that it does not exist. And there were some questions there for a while, and I have a couple of quotes here, but there were some questions about the validity of the Septuagint, because right off the bat, I'm going to say that there were some differences between the Masoretic Text and what the Septuagint was saying. And remember, for a long time, because this wasn't found until the 1940s on. Okay, so none of the Dead Sea Scrolls were able to be put in anything like the later versions of the Bible, like the KJV, Geneva, and even more contemporary ones that were before this particular time, because they weren't available. So, back then, any differences that were between the Masoretic Text and the Septuagint, they were just kind of written off like the Septuagint was just wrong and inaccurate, and not necessarily couldn't be trusted. But here I've got a quote here for us. So, until the discovery of the Dead Sea Scrolls, the oldest known substantial Bible manuscripts in the Hebrew dated from around the 10th century CE. So I've showed you that. And the Dead Sea Scrolls, which date from about the 2nd century BCE to the 1st century, move that time horizon back a millennium. So I may have been a little wrong, but 2,000 years to the 1st, or 200 BCE, so 2nd century to the 1st century CE. And here's another quote from the New World Encyclopedia about the Septuagint. The sources of the many differences between the Septuagint and the Masoretic Text. Now remember, I was telling you, they started to notice there was a lot of differences, and they immediately just assumed that the Septuagint was incorrect. And you'll see that in a second here. So the differences between the two, the Septuagint and the Masoretic Text, have been long been discussed by the scholars. The most widely accepted view today is that the Septuagint provides a reasonably accurate record of an early Semitic textual variant. So let me just go back over here and show you what this is saying. Now they believe that this is a very reasonable and good translation of something that existed, the Hebrew text that existed before, but again does not exist. Before, they didn't believe that. They didn't agree with that. Like I said, they just assumed that this had some inaccuracies or whatever. But now they believe that this is a legitimate, a good copy of that. So let's go back to my quote here. So now they believe that it is a reliably or reasonably accurate record of an earlier Semitic, which is Hebrew textual variant, now lost, that differed from precursors of the Masoretic text. Ancient scholars, however, did not suspect this. Early Christians, who were largely unfamiliar with Hebrew texts, and were thus only made aware of the differences through the newer Greek versions, tended to dismiss the differences as a product of uninspired translation of the Hebrew in these new versions. Following the Renaissance, a common opinion among some humanists was that the Septuagint translators bungled the translation from the Hebrew, and that the Septuagint became more corrupt with time. But this is where it changes. The discovery of many fragments in the Dead Sea Scrolls that agree with the Septuagint rather than the Masoretic text proved that many of the variants in Greek were also present in early Semitic manuscripts. So what they're saying is that they started to see that the Dead Sea Scrolls were agreeing with this Greek. So the suggestion is that the Dead Sea Scrolls and this older Hebrew may be very, very similar. And again, there were differences. So it turns out that, again, we have these differences between the Masoretic text and the Septuagint, but there's also these differences here between the Masoretic text and the Dead Sea Scrolls. I have the Samaritan Pentateuch because that also comes into play, and it can have differences with the Masoretic text as well. And it's not always the Septuagint differs with the Masoretic text and agrees with the Dead Sea Scrolls. There are some where they disagree here and agree here. So it's not just universal. But in my experience, in the ones that I'm finding that seem to be really something to look at, the Septuagint and the Dead Sea Scrolls, where there is an ability to check between the two, they are in agreement. And what I mean by that is the Dead Sea Scrolls, they are not a complete copy of the Old Testament. In fact, some of these things I'm going to show you have some pictures of the fragments. You'll see how small some of these fragments are. And there's places where I'm going to show you, just large gaps in the text, because the medium that all this was written on, which was animal skins or whatever, didn't quite survive. But there is a full scroll of the book of Isaiah, and it's a preserved entire scroll. It's called the Great Isaiah Scroll. But anyway, that's basically all I wanted to show here, is that you have all these different ones, and this is just essentially the Old Testament that I'm talking about. There's things like the Leningrad Codex and I don't know. It's evading me right now, but there are some others, and there's a whole bunch that I don't know about Greek at all. But we're going to focus on these, and I'm going to show you, like I said, we're going to look at some of the Masoretic text. We're going to look at what they say, and what we're going to do is we're going to compare it. And what we're going to do also, surely, I may have said this already at the beginning, but look at things in the New Testament, and I read, and it's quoting something from the Old Testament. And then when I go back and I look at what it says in the Old Testament, it turns out it's not the same thing at all. And you're like, what's going on? So we're going to look at some of those, and I think I've got some more quotes and things like that we're going to look at. But I want to jump on through here. We're at 27 minutes. All right, so what's my next one? All right, so I do want to show this. Historical, this is from this particular website. Historical research reveals 5 significant ways in which the Masoretic text is different from the original Old Testament. So the Masoretes admitted that they received corrupt text to begin with. The Masoretic text is written with a radically different alphabet than the original. The Masoretes added vowel points, and we're going to talk about that one quite a bit, about the vowel points, because the original, or the Dead Sea Scrolls and things like that, and what I believe the original Hebrew, or the older Hebrew, did not have vowel points. The Masoretes are the ones that added the vowel points, and that's going to be important here. We're going to look at. But they've also excluded several books from the Old Testament scriptures, and they made some changes to prophecy and doctrine. I'm not going to really focus on any of that. In this, instead of reading all this, you can pause and you can read it, but I want to read basically down here at the bottom. The Masoretes themselves felt that they had received a partly corrupted text. Just understand that whether these changes, differences that I'm about to show you were intentional or not by the Masoretes, that's up for debate. But just know that they don't believe that what they necessarily started out with was not corrupt. Another thing of note as well is, the reason that this even exists is because the Jews at the time were having they did not like the Greek version, and they were like, what? Since we don't have, this older Hebrew, they decided we don't like this. We're going to compile and come up with something, and they've got the Masoretic text. And all right, so let's look at this one. All right. So we'll come back to that here in a second. Let's go into the Bible. And I've got a lot of verses that I'm going to go through. Hopefully I can run through these pretty quick. But we're going to start with this one here in Judges 18. And I want to say, these differences here that I'm showing you, they're not necessarily going to be big doctrine changing differences here. But what I wanted to show you is that there is something going on under the surface that you may not be aware of by reading your single version of the Bible. That's why I always encourage people, first of all, I encourage people to find a version of the Bible that you're going to read. And then if you're reading it, then what you need to do from there is find a version, find some other versions to compare and contrast, okay? And where there's a difference, that's something to study and to get into. I have, I don't know, I think I have some 70 versions on this tablet here, last I checked anyway. So, as I said in one of the slides here, that they made some changes to the vowel points. Well, they did a little bit more than that in this particular verse here. It's not so much just the vowel points that are different, but it's they added a letter. And so let's just read the verse. I'm going to go to this LBP version. And the Danites set up a graven image. So this is important to what we're talking about. They set up a graven image. This is false god worship, so this is negative, okay? And Jonathan, who is the son of Gershon, the son of Manasseh, he and his sons were priests to the tribe of Dan. So they served as priests to the tribe of Dan, the ones that set up the graven image, until the day of captivity. So what's going on with this particular verse? All right, so let's go into compare. And I'm going to show you something. I may go ahead and show you this picture right off the bat. So this is an excerpt from the book, the Textual Criticism book. And here you've got this these two different versions of the Masoretic Text. So one version of the Masoretic Text, you can see here, it says Yehonatan ben Gershom ben Moses, or Moshe. And that's Jonathan, son of Gershom, son of Moses. But down here, you see that's got this raised nun right here. So it's Yehonatan ben Gershom ben Manasseh. And so you can read here that the author, he says, this belongs to a small group of passages containing what the Masoretes called otiot teliot, or suspended letters. The nun was inserted above the line in order to change Moses to Manasseh, and thereby removing Moses' name from the scandalous context. Now remember what I said when I was explaining this, is that this is bad. This is false god worship, because, oh wow, it did this to me here. Let me go back, 1830. Somehow or another it keeps changing. But they set up for themselves a carved image, and they were priests, right? This guy was the priest, Jonathan, the son of Gershom. Okay, so what they did in this particular instance, the Masoretes, the idea is that they changed it from Moses, and you can see here the difference where it goes from Mem, Sheen, Hey. They've added this nun in there to change it from Moses to Manasseh. And what's crazy here is, the Septuagint, this is based off the Septuagint, this Greek, they use Manasseh. But you can see down here a bunch of versions picked up on it, and they said, let me come down here and show you. I've got some versions of Hebrew here. This one, it's interesting. I'm going to click on it and then click down here on About Module. And you'll see that this particular version has corrected readings from the Masoretic, the Dead Sea Scrolls, that Samaritan Pentateuch, the Peshitta, Targums, the Vulgate, and other things. So they based their version off of several manuscripts, not just the Masoretic text. And you can see here we've got Yehonatan ben Gershom ben Moshe, so that's son of Moses. But down here you've got this one, and when I click on this one, it doesn't actually tell you what it's based off of, but it's based off of the Masoretic. And you can see here, instead of saying Moses, they've added this nun here. All right, sorry about that. I had to pause it. I don't want to take too much time on this. I can show you all kinds of things, and you can see that we've got everything from Manasseh to Moses. Just know that the idea, the belief is that they've added this nun, and they've even showed you that. Let me click on this. This is something that I've done here in the past, and you can actually see where the nun is hanging. And it's pretty nice to see it the way that they did. If I can't find it here in a second, then yeah, it's not going to show up. It's not updating for me. All right, so like I said, I don't want to spend too much time on it because I do have some other ones. But I do have a quote here that I want to tell you before we get into the other ones, because these other two are very similar. And the quote is, Dr. Michael Heiser has a podcast called The Naked Bible. And in episode 423, his guest, this particular gentleman, states at verse 7, or in 1727, this is the minute mark, states that it does happen periodically where the Masoretes repoint, and they're talking about the vowels, because these vowels are called pointings, where they repoint things in order to get across a different image. So in the case of that one, what they were trying to do is there was a negative context or connotation with that particular verse, because they were trying to spare Moses the blemish that his ancestor, his grandson, was involved in false god. Not only just involved with it, but he was a priest to the tribe of Dan. Anyway, it's not the only case. I'm going to show you a couple other ones here where there's some pointings that seem to change the text a bit. Let's see what my next one is. I think I'm going to do Jeremiah. Let's go to Jeremiah here first. And I think I'm going to move Malachi down. So in Jeremiah, there's this thing called the Queen of Heaven. In Jeremiah 7, verse 18, the children gather wood, and the father kindles the fire, and the women knead dough to make cakes to the Queen of Heaven, and they pour out drink offerings to other gods, that they may provoke me to anger. So this is one that this particular translation and most translations get right, because it is they're looking at other things other than the Masoretic Text. And what I mean by that is the word itself would make people think, if they were looking at it that didn't have the pointings, and the pointings are these little things here underneath and on top of the letters. Those are the vowels. The ones that you see here, the large letters, those are all consonants. So what they were doing is they were translating the word itself with no vowels, and they came up with the word queen. And I've got some notes here that I'm going to show you here in a second that make this a little bit more understandable. But the Masoretes, what they did is again, this is one of these negative connotations here. They're making cakes for this. The Queen of Heaven is a goddess. She is associated with Ishtar and some other ones that are, I can't think of the names of them right off the Anana, I think is one, something like that. But Ishtar, a goddess, and so the Masoretes, they were interested in changing the text to make this not so much of a blemish on the record of the Hebrews, so to speak. And so what they did, and this is kind of confusing here, but I'm going to come on down. So the word for queen in the construct phase is the malkat. Okay, malkat. But there's this other thing. It looks almost exactly the same, and I couldn't blow this up at all, but there's an aleph in the middle here. And this changes the pronunciation of the word to maleket. And what the Masoretes did is they kept the spelling of the word which is, like I said, malkat, but they added the vowel pointings for maleket. So when you're reading this, it sounds like the word for work. And so what they're saying is instead of the Queen of Heaven, they're making cakes for the works or the work of heaven. And I've got some interesting notes here from a study that I did listening to that particular podcast. And if you want to pause it, you can. But here they got the vowels for maleket, even though it's spelled exactly like queen is. And I think that's why they got it right. They were looking at it maybe without the vowel markings, and they saw, hey, even the pronouns around it were pointing to it being queen. But if you look at the word itself has vowel pointings for maleket, which is works. But again, you're missing this aleph to make it really the word maleket. Hopefully that's not too confusing. What I'm trying to do here is just show that there's something going on, and I'm showing that this is not a singularity or a single event where the Masoretes have construed to change the vowel pointings to save face, so to speak, or protect the integrity of themselves or Moses, as in the case before. In Malachi, this is one that I found, and I'm not sure that you're going to find a whole lot to support this. I do have something that supports it, but just a little background here. Let me read the verse first. So this is Malachi 4, and this is verse 2. But to you who fear my name, the Son, S-U-N, of righteousness shall arise with healing in his wings. Okay, I'm going to stop there. So I remember when I was, before I'd started studying Hebrew at all, I remember looking this up because there was a time period where I was really interested in studying Nimrod. And if you study Nimrod, what you're going to get into inevitably is Mithraism or sun god worship. And, when I read this verse, it bothers me because the word son, I'm like, where else in the Bible is the God of the Bible, Yahweh or Jesus, anything ever related to by the Son? When are they ever referred to as the S-U-N? Now, in English, there's a word play that can go on here, the S-O-N of righteousness. But remember, this was not originally written in English, so that word play cannot go here. And that's something, that really irks me about some of these Bible teachers that want to use something in English to do word plays, because that only really applies to the Bible in English. And what about all the other people in the world that don't, read English? And if you're going to make a word pun or something like that, it's going to have to be in what it was written in. And in this case, it's Hebrew. And, me not knowing anything about Hebrew at the time, I get on here and I click on it and I'm like, all right, so let's take a look at it. And here we see the word, and I'm like, okay, it says the sun. And so I click on the word. I see, okay, it says Shemesh, and it's the sun. And sure enough, it's sun. And I'm like, well, okay, it's the sun. I just got to suck it up. It means the sun. And some years later, I was studying Hanukkah, and I learned that the middle candle was called the shamash. And I was like, where have I heard of that word? And let me write this down because this is interesting here. I'm going to scroll up. So the word that we're talking about is Sheen, Mem, Sheen. Two sheens and a mem. Okay. And so the word for sun is, if you add these vowel pointings right here, it is shemesh. But remember, the vowel pointings didn't exist in the original. And even in the Dead Sea Scrolls, there are no vowel pointings. So if I were to change these vowel pointings, and I'm not entirely sure what that is, it's either going to be that or that, I would assume. These things that look like little T's underneath. That changes it from Shemesh to Shamash. And it's interesting that the word Shamash means servant. So now, let's go back to, not that, let's go back to here, and let's read, instead of son, let's read it as servant. But to you who fear my name, the servant of righteousness shall arise with healing in his wings. And there's an awesome study that can be made here, because remember the woman with the issue of the blood. She came to touch, what most Bible versions say the hem of his garment. But I don't believe it was just the hem of his garment. It was something on the edges or the border of his particular garment. And if we look at the word for wings, it's this word, where's it at? Okay, kanaf. And let's click on it here. It's the border, and on this particular border is where the tzitzit, the fringes are. And it's interesting that there's more than one place in the New Testament where it says that people came to grab hold of the Messiah's, the fringes of his garment. And I believe it's because there's a verse right here that says that when the servant of righteousness, which obviously is something that you can back up with the rest of scriptures, the servant of righteousness, he shall come with healing in the borders of his garment. And it's not just the woman with the issue of blood that came and was healed, but it was others as well. I'm not going to get into that now, but just know that that's there. And so the point that I'm making here is, there's not any real way to know whether this is supposed to be Shemesh or Shamash. But to me, Shemesh, son, doesn't really go. It doesn't belong with the God of the Bible, in my opinion. And I could be wrong. If I am, then I'm, it's my mistake. But it just does not sit well with me. And here's something that I have here. This is from this one particular person's blog here. And again, it's the wings or the borders of the talit, where the tzitzits are. And you can see in most translations and in the Hebrew Masoretic Text, Malachi 4:2 says, "But for you who fear me, fear my name, the Son of Righteousness, S-U-N, shall rise with healing in its wings." From its context, this verse is clearly messianic in its meaning, but it also seems to link to sun god worship, as often ancient sun gods like the Persian god Ahura Mazda or the Egyptian god Horus were depicted with wings in the picture. Okay, so I just found this today. I didn't get the picture. However, God strongly condemns the worship of the sun. How can the Messiah be linked to the sun or by association to any sun god worship? The issue arises from a problem in the Hebrew Masoretic Text. Until the Middle Ages, Hebrew did not use vowels. The word in this verse was simply written as shin, mem, shin. However, vowels were introduced in the Masoretic Text sometime in the first millennium, first 1,000 years. The word in this verse had been orally transmitted as shemesh, which means sun. A similar word with the identical spelling of shamash, which means servant. So the word shamash means servant. This word is used to designate both the shamash candle of the Hanukkah. So the reason it's called the shamash candle is it's called the servant candle. It's the one that you use to light the other candles. So it's spreading its light during the festival of light. And it's just, there's so many parallels with Jesus, Yeshua. So it says the word is used to designate both the shamash candle of the Hanukkah and the blue thread of the tzitzit. That's interesting. I've not heard that before. Therefore, it is well possible that a mistake was made when the vowels were introduced or during the oral transmission of the pronunciation, with the probably correct pronunciation shamash. The verse says, "But for you who fear my name, the servant of righteousness shall arise with healing in its wings." All right, let's see. What's this next? All right, so we're going to hold on for that one. Let me get down to my Bible here. Let's try to pick up some pace. Genesis 9. All right, so this is interesting. I'm not going to spend a whole lot of time on this. I'm just going to point out the differences. I'm going to point out something here, too, that you may not be familiar with. But this is where Noah, they just got off the ark. Noah got drunk. And there's some really interesting stuff here if you get into it about what this verse is actually suggesting here. But one I'm going to focus on is, and he drank the wine and he was drunk and became uncovered in his tent. And this is a small thing. I know it's a small thing, but I want you to see what's going on here. I'm going to hit compare. And I want you to see that the word for his tent is this right here. The word is ohel. And I'm thinking I'm pronouncing that right, but ohel. Ohelo. And that is this vav at the end, this thing that looks like a nail at the end, is what's added. It's a suffix, and it's for his. But right up here, you can see that it does not have that vav suffix at the end. You've got the root of the word here for tent, but at the end, it's got this H, and H is the suffix for her. And some interesting things that you start to see here is you start to see this over here. You've got ohlo, and then you've got ohla. So which is it? Well, let me see if I can find where it's got this. Yeah, so let me click on this, and I'm going to show you something called the Korei Ketiv. Korei, these are Aramaic, I believe. But they are very, very similar to Hebrew, which is kara, that which is called out, and kativ, that which is written. So they've got this in here, and they've got this in this is the Biblia Hebraica Stuttgartensia. Not sure what the E stands for in this particular case, but it's the Biblia Hebraica Stuttgartensia. They've got these in the margin, and what they have is, this is what is written in the text, but when you read it, this is what you will read aloud. So again, that which is called out, that which is written. So if you were to see this in one of the BHSEs, you would see over in the side the Korei version, and it would have the Ketiv version, but when you're reading it, you would get to this right here, and you would say, okay, in the midst of his tent, even though what is written says her tent. Okay, that may have some significance, and it does in my mind, in the basis of the story. But that's not the purpose of this particular story. I just wanted to show you a good version or good example of Korei Ketiv. All right, so let's keep going, trucking on here. So Habakkuk 3:5. All right, so let me look at my notes here. So this is interesting. So before him goes pestilence, and a burning flame goes forth at his feet. So what's interesting here is the Masoretic Text and others translate this as pestilence because of the vowels for DBR or DVR. And let me show you that real quick. So let me erase these somewhat. So same concept. You've got these three vowels here. So in Hebrew, when I look at this, I'm immediately going to think of word, matter, or thing. And it's davar. And but apparently and I'm not entirely sure on how this is written, but it's daber versus davar, and this one vowel change right here changes it from word or matter or thing to pestilence or sickness or something like that. So let's go back and look at the Bible, and I'll just go ahead and close this, and let's look at compare here. And one thing I wanted to show you here is that the word that the Greek uses is logos, which is word. So John 1:1, in the beginning was the word, the logos. Okay, so before his face shall go a word, versus a pestilence or a disease. And again, this is just the difference between daver, or, and here's the Dead Sea Scrolls here. You see that there's no vowel markings. It's just dalet, bet, resh. But most of the places here has daver. Actually, that's daver. Daver. Yeah. So again, it's a difference between vowel pointings, between the difference between pestilence or word or matter. And again, in the Dead Sea Scrolls, there are no pointings. They just, somebody made a call and said, well, this is this particular thing. But there are, they use the word word. Obviously, this is from the Septuagint, as is this. They changed the word to report. But there are some that use word or matter or report. Here's another one. All right, moving on. Like I said, some of these are small. Not going to spend a whole lot of time on these. When we get into the things pertaining to the Messiah, that's when I'm going to take a little bit more time. All right, so I can't spend a whole lot of time on this, but in the, in order to try to save some more time, just know that in Psalm 119, they have the verses start off. It's kind of in a pattern according to the alphabet. So the first 8 verses, every single letter, the first letter of the verse starts with an aleph, and then it goes to a bet, and then a gimel, and then a dalet, and hey, vav, zayin, het, tet, all the way on until the end of the chapter. Well, this one is similar. Instead of there being 8 for each letter, there's only 1. And there's supposed to be 22 because there are 22 characters in the Hebrew alphabet. But there's only 21. And the difference is, I'm going to pull up this HB, let's go to HB2. So this right here is just the beginning. It's saying it's a Psalm of David. What is that? Tehillah, the David, and so we've got the aleph there for the first letter, the bet, and then the gimel, and then the dalet, and then the hey, vav, zayin, het, tet, yud, kaf, lamed, mem, and then verse 14 is supposed to be nun. But there is no nun here. It starts with samek. And remember I said that this particular version uses corrected versions from the Dead Sea Scrolls and other things like that. Well, it added the verse that was missing, but it added it to the end of verse 13. And you can see here there's the nun. But there are a lot of translations that don't have that nun at all. So let's look at this one. And you can see mem, and there's no mem at all. It ends, and then it goes to the samek. Well, what version, or what does the Bible say here? Actually, what are we missing if we don't see that particular verse? So verse 13 It says, let me come down here to the Septuagint. So here's 13, and then they added 13a. The Lord is faithful in his words and holy in all of his works. But again, here's the King James. Thy kingdom is an everlasting kingdom, and thy dominion endureth throughout all generations, because they are one of the versions that is leaning heavily on the Masoretic Text. And here you have the Septuagint. It says the same thing, but adds that the Lord is faithful in his words and holy in all his works. All right, quickly, Deuteronomy 32. So this may be the last one before we start getting into some messianic ones, and I feel like the messianic ones have more weight to them. But let's take a look. So when the Most High gave the nations their inheritance, when he separated the sons of man, this is man, sons of Adam. In Hebrew, the word for man is Adam. Another word is Ish. He set the boundaries of the people according to the number of the children of Israel. Okay, so let's take a look at this. What's going on? So when he gave the nations their inheritance, when he separated mankind. So when did he separate mankind? The only place that I can think of where he separated mankind would be the Tower of Babel. The problem is the time of the Tower of Babel, there is no Israel, okay? And that's the difference that we're going to see here. Let's see. Yeah, I'm just looking at my notes real quick, making sure I didn't miss anything. But here you can see that the Greek, the Septuagint, reads according to the number of the angels of God. So that's a big difference. Angels versus the sons of Israel. That's what you have here, the B'nai Israel, and that's what you're seeing here in the Aleppo Codex. But let's go down here to the Dead Sea Scrolls, and what you'll see here is you'll see the word B'nai Elohim. And what they've done is they've added the Vav in here for the O, the Holom. I think it's Holom Vav, I guess is what it's called. I could be wrong, but it's an O. And come down here to my different versions here. You can see the ones that were corrected by the other versions, by the Dead Sea Scrolls. You can see here it says Elohim in the Dead Sea Scrolls at the 4Q, and the Septuagint as well. But over here, you've got these versions that agree with Israel. Okay, so remember what I said about majority does not necessarily equal original. So here you've got the Vulgate, the Syriac, the Targums, the Masoretic Text, and the Samaritan Pentateuch all say Israel. But the problem is that Israel didn't exist. So the Dead Sea Scrolls say Elohim. And I actually have a picture of the Dead Sea Scrolls here. Let me see. I think it's... All right. No, that's not it. It is over here. So hard to see. Like I said, it's amazing. This type of script is really difficult for me even. And I say me even. I've been practicing Hebrew for some time now, and it's hard for me to look at this and say, okay, this is definitely the word B'nai. So that's supposed to be a bet, a nun, and a yod, and this is Elohim, and this is the mem that's partially cut off, and you can see this big, huge yod thing right here. And what's going to come into play here in a little bit, you see the yod looks like this big apostrophe. It's got this giant, and this is supposed to be one too. But this is a vav that's straight up and down, right? And we're going to look at that here in a little bit. That's going to come into play what we're looking at. But just know that there's a difference here. B'nai Elohim versus B'nai Israel. And the reason that they said angels of God is because B'nai Elohim, the sons of God, if you study Genesis 6, and even if you or one that goes with the Sethite view there. You've got B'nai Elohim, the sons of God, or the angels of God, were the ones that were at the in the throne room in Job. Okay, when Satan presented himself, it says the B'nai Elohim were there as well. So I don't want to spend too much on that. Let's see, what are we on now? All right, so these are starting things that have to do with the Messiah, right? Okay, so Isaiah 42 is talking about, see my servant, okay? So verse 4 says, he does not become weak or crushed until he is established right ruling in the earth, and the coastlands wait for his Torah. So this is interesting. I think in order for us to see what's going on here, we're going to have to go to Matthew, where this is quoted. And it says that instead of the so here's the he shall not strive or cry out, nor shall anyone hear his voice in the streets. A crushed root he shall not break, and smoking flax he shall not quench, till he has brings forth right ruling forever, and nations shall trust in his name. The Goyim, or the Gentiles, shall trust in his name. Let's see, let me go back, let me hit close. So Matthew quotes this verse and says that it's the Gentiles will trust in his name. But the scriptures here, this is the Bible version that I'm using, says the coastlands will wait for his Torah. You can see that the Septuagint and others, what Matthew says. So let's look at the Septuagint for this particular verse. And you can see this is where it's from. The crushed reed does not break, and smoking flax he does not quench. He brings forth right ruling. But they've got this weird thing that says the coastlands wait for his Torah. And so if we hit compare here, we'll see that the Septuagint here says, and upon his name nations shall hope. What I think is interesting is, for a believer in Yeshua or Jesus to, talk to a Jewish brother and sister, or somebody that is a Torah-keeping believer in Yahweh, but they do not hold that Jesus is the Messiah. This would be nice to be able to point to and say, look, the Gentiles, those that were not originally part of Israel, they shall be given hope upon his name. And I just think it's interesting that there's a difference there. But the Masoretic Text, which is what the Jews hold as authoritative, does not say anything about the Gentiles here. It doesn't say that they shall have hope. And this is clearly messianic in nature. And there's some other ones that we're going to get to here in a minute that I think will kind of I think will be really interesting to you, and maybe even kind of blow your mind here. All right, Psalm 40 verse 6. Let me see. Yep, so let's click on it and check it out. Let's click on this single version. Slaughtering and meal offering, or sacrifice and offering you did not desire. And this is quoted many times in the New Testament. It says, go see what this means. Sacrifice and offering you did not desire. It's interesting. It says, you have opened my ears. Ascending offering and sin offering you did not ask for. So I'm going to click on Hebrews 10:5. And it says, therefore, coming into the world, he says, sacrifice and meal offering you did not desire, but a body you have prepared for me. And it's interesting here. So we've got this thing that says, but a body you have prepared for me. So let's go back and let's see what we've got here. Sure enough, in the Septuagint, a sacrifice and offering you wanted not, but a body you readied to me. And I don't know about you, but what I think of when I hear of a body that you have readied for me is that it's a physical representation of something that already existed, something that was pre-existing. And remember that our bodies, and this is right off the top of my head here, but there's a Bible verse that talks about how we exist in these jars of clay. And some of you may remember the group back in the 90s, I believe. They were a Christian group band, and they were called Jars of Clay. And essentially, we've got these physical bodies that are temporary. And we know from John 1, and I've already said this, and this is really going to kind of dovetail and segue into my second video, but John 1 tells us that the Word was with God. It was pre-existent, right? But a body now has been prepared for the Messiah. And again, this is something that the Masoretic Text, and thus the Jew, would have missed. And if you look at some of these things, you can click on them, and they'll show some differences here. Oznaim, which is ears, and that's in the Masoretic Text. However, Septuagint and in Hebrews 10, we get the part about the body being prepared. All right. Okay, so this one gets interesting. So, at the cross, Yeshua, Jesus, he says, my God, why have you forsaken me?" And it just so happens that Psalm 22 starts off in a similar way. My God, why have you forsaken me? Eli, Eli, lama sabachthani. And I believe here it's lama azavtani. Let me see. Eli, Eli. Where's it? Okay, Eli, Eli, lama azavtani. Why have you forsaken me? So, I believe sabachthani may be Aramaic from the Eloi, Eloi, lama sabachthani. But anyway, he points us to this particular psalm, I believe, on the cross. And when you read Psalm 22, you can see that it reads like he's on the cross, okay? Because it talks about how he's a reproach, he's despised, they mock him, they shake their head, which is similar to, a mocking, okay? It says, the bulls of Bashan, strong bulls of Bashan, have encircled me. They have opened their mouths against me as a raging and roaring lion. I've been poured out like water, and all my bones have been spread apart. And it says that they have, his tongue is cleaving to his jaws. For dogs have surrounded me, a crowd of evil ones have encircled me, piercing my hands and my feet. I count on my bones. They divide my garments among them, and for my raiment they cast lots. I mean, this is all prophetic, all happening at the cross. So what's going on here? Obviously, I have 16. So I said to you about the Masoretic Text and about Jews, unfortunately, because of their heavy reliance on the Masoretic Text, I believe that they may be missing. And again, I've mentioned this, I said this already, and I want to reiterate at this point that the Septuagint was written by Jews, okay? So, they can't claim, or they can, but it's not a good claim to say that the Gentiles have somehow corrupted. It's possible, but what I'm saying is back in the day, it should have been, in my opinion, my ignorant no doubt ignorant opinion is, this should be something that they should readily accept, because these are Jews, especially if this is gone, right? Especially if that's uh, been destroyed or whatever, it's gone. And we know that they have come to, believe this may be from the Dead Sea Scrolls, but, they believe that this to be an accurate translation of this much older Hebrew. So I'm just saying it's unfortunate. But the Jews, their translation here does not say piercing my hands and my feet. And I think if anything, if I'd have said, take something from verse 16 and remove it, what's the most important piece that points to Jesus? For me, I would have said piercing my hands and my feet. And that's something that the Jews, they don't have in their translation. Instead, this is interesting. Instead, what they have is like a lion, my hands and my feet. And that doesn't really even make sense, but let's take a look at it and see how they got here. And again, from the Septuagint here, we have the verb is to dig, okay? It's, let's see, I think it's kara, I believe. It's kaf, resh, hey. I think that's what it is, but anyway, they dug, they've made holes essentially into my hands and my feet. But if you come down here, and we'll take a look at it, and we'll see that there are some that have chosen to go with the like a lion, my hands and my feet. Let me see. Maybe way down here. Yeah, here's one. The Tanakh, 1917. For dogs have encompassed me, a company of evildoers have enclosed me. Like a lion, they are at my hands and my feet. So where do they get this at? Where does that come from? Okay. It comes from, and here's the Tanakh here, it comes from this word right here. And it's from the verb, it's this word here. Let me get that off there. Ari. And you've heard the name Ariel, like Ariel Sharon, or the Little Mermaid, but Ariel is the Lion of God, and Aryeh is lion as well, and it's used earlier and later in this particular verse or chapter. But this kaf at the very beginning is like or as, and I think it let me see if I can find where it breaks it down here. I've got some tools here where they break it down. Yeah, so as with the kaf and ari, lion, like a lion, at my hands and my feet. But let's go up here and see what the other options are. So again, these are the ones that use other versions, and they have, instead of kari, they've got karu, and this is a different word altogether. So instead of this being a prefix, it is now part of the root, ka'ar, and I think I said kara earlier, but it may be ka'ar, I'm not really sure, but it's the verb to dig, and they have dug my hands and my feet, okay? And I'm not an expert, like I said, but here you see the Dead Sea Scrolls, the Septuagint, and here we have agreement with the Syriac and the Vulgate. But here in the Targums and in the Masoretic Text, you've got Kari versus Karu. And let's go to the Dead Sea Scrolls here, and you can see, and I'm going to show you this, and I think we actually have to go to verse 17 to see it in the Dead Sea Scrolls. Yeah, there's a difference here in the Dead Sea Scrolls. But you can see it's got the vav, ka'aru, not ka'ari. And like I said, I actually do have this in the Dead Sea Scrolls. And I'm going to show you this right here. This is the scanned infrared. And I think the one that doesn't have an infrared is even harder to see than this. And I stared at this thing for a long time looking at it, because I think in the Dead Sea Scroll website that I was looking at, somehow or another, I can't remember, but I found this, and at the bottom there was a note that said, this is pierced, or something like that. But I stared at this for a while, and what I did over here is I grabbed some. This is something that you can see clearly, and this is what I was talking about earlier, this big yod right here. It looks like, to me, it almost looks like a small lamed, okay? I don't see any lameds on this page to really show you, but to me, this looks like a small lamed, but it's a yod, and this is what Jesus, Yeshua, when he says, not one jot or tittle, not one yod, not the smallest letter in the Hebrew alphabet shall pass away. Not the smallest letter of the Torah, not one yod or tittle shall pass away until all is fulfilled. But right here, this nail-looking thing, and the word vav, or the letter vav, I think the word vav means nail, but this is a vav. It's a single line. Sometimes you can see they go up a little bit, but you can see the big difference here. So now let's go back, and this is where I traced it out. And to me, like I said, the letters look a little bit different from what I'm used to, but this is a kaf, an aleph, a resh, and a vav. And we'll come over here so you can see it. You can see how the kaf comes around. The aleph has these little hooks right here. Then you've got the resh. And you can see clearly how this, but you can see how this comes all the way down, right? You can see how and there's a yod right here. You can see how it comes down like that. This is a vav. This is not a yod. So, ka'aru. And the experts agree. They've put it in here. So, just know that for the Jew, when they're reading their authoritative version of the Hebrew, Verse 16 in chapter 22 of Psalms says, "For dogs have surrounded me, a crowd of evil ones have encircled me. Like a lion, they are at my hands and my feet." And I think there's probably a lot of play there for them to get that, right? So here, it's the difference between ka'aru and ka'ari. So that's one. We should be getting close to the end here. Got 3 more left. Where are we at? Still really long. All right, so this is interesting. Isaiah 7:14. Therefore Yahweh himself, and if you're not familiar with this right here, this is called the Tetragrammaton. I like this particular version because it shows me where God's name is being used, right? So in your version, most English translations, they will have capital L, capital O, capital R, capital D. And there's all kinds of nonsense, in my opinion, on why they don't use his covenantal name. But I like it. I want it there. So therefore, Yahweh himself gives you a sign. Look, the Alma. So this is the Hebrew for the word there. And it says, the Alma conceives and gives birth to a son, and shall call his name Emmanuel, God with us. So this Bible version that I like apparently chose not to side one way or the other on what they believe that this is saying. So they chose, and that's what I'm coming to right here now. But they didn't put the word virgin, and they put a little note here, virgin or young woman, and it says see explanation. Okay, we're not going to click on that, but I've got an entire book that somebody's written, and it's called where's it at? It's in my slide here. It's called The Mother of the Infant King, Isaiah 7:14, and it's by this guy Christophe Rico. I believe he's French, even though his last name looks Spanish to me. And apparently this guy named Peter Gentry, and this is on page 196. I'm going to get into that in a second. But there is a dispute. So Jews will say that the word Alma is not the word for virgin. So let me just say this. For us as, for Christians, for those of us that believe that Jesus is the Messiah, we have the New Testament. The New Testament flat out tells us that it's quoting the passage here. It says, "The virgin shall conceive." Okay, and really, to be honest with you, that seals the deal for me. However, when I found that there was a dispute, I like to find out and get to the bottom of things. And when I found that there was this book, I listened to another podcast, and I can't think of the name of it right off the top of my head, but it's about Bible translation. And the guy that does it is the guy that's with him and his wife. They do Aleph with Bet or Aleph with Beth on YouTube, and they're teaching Hebrew to people. And he has a podcast, Living or Learning with the Word, one of those, but it's about Bible translation. And I heard this particular guy get on there, and he the book is really dense, in my opinion. I'm not a very smart guy, and it's difficult. It was very difficult for me to get through. But so Jews will say that the word Alma means young maiden, and it does not mean virgin. In fact, they say that we have another word for virgin, and it's Betula. And so they say that Alma cannot be virgin. So before we get into my quotes here, I'm going to go to compare, and I'm going to show you that the Septuagint uses the word parthenos, which is a virgin. Okay, and also I believe there may be some contention with parthenos, but I'm not really going to get into that. Parthenos, Alma, and then you can see here Betula. These are all synonyms, supposedly, right? So this guy goes into great detail to prove linguistically that the word Alma can mean virgin. And I went through and I found a couple of quotes here. So this is just to show you that there is some contention here. So there's a consensus among scholars today, regardless of whether one is conservative or liberal, that the word Alma means only young girl or perhaps young woman and does not necessarily entail virginity. 4 arguments are normally used to support this view. And I will say that this is just in the appendix, he goes into great detail, and apparently these are arguments that people have used against his book, and he has gone in there with an appendix and in painstaking detail went through each one of these. So if you're interested, check out his book. But like I said, in my opinion, it's very difficult reading. So 4 arguments are normally used to support this view. An argument based on etymology, which is where a word comes from, is my best understanding of how to explain it. An argument that there already exists a word in Hebrew for virgin, which is Betula. An argument that assumes the word Alma in Proverbs 30, verse 19, refers to a girl who is not a virgin. And an argument from Jewish tradition, both ancient and solid. That's a direct quote, so it says solid, that does not permit an equation between Alma and Parthenos, the Greek word for virgin. So here is a big quote from his conclusion. And I've highlighted and bolded his big points here that I wanted to make. But it's interesting that he goes and he explains the etymology. He uses many different languages, and his conclusion is that it's been shown that the term Alma referred initially to an adolescent virgin until the beginning of her fertile life. And at the end, he says, in contrast to Betula, the word Alma refers to an adolescent who is a virgin. And if you want to read all of this in in an attempt to be quicker here, just pause the video. I'm going to continue on. That's my last slide. We've got a couple more verses. Just know that Alma, it's not contentious as far as what the Hebrew says here. I want to be clear about that as well. So all of the Hebrew versions that I have, they all say Alma. Okay, so it's not a difference in the Masoretic text. What I'm showing you here isn't so much an issue with the Masoretic text as it is in modern day Judaism that's coming against something that's messianic here. Okay, so that whether it's the best place to put this, I'm putting it in there because it has to do with textual criticism, but it's not a mark against the Masoretic text. So finally, I've got two more. Let's go through this real quick. I'm going to click on the scriptures. So this is Deuteronomy 32:43. O nations, acclaim his people, for he avenges the blood of his servants and returns vengeance to his adversaries. And shall pardon his land, his people. So what's missing here is interesting. There's actually this verse is a lot longer. And what I want to point out too is, again, if a believer Messiah, Yeshua Messiah, Jesus the Messiah, is having a conversation with Jews. So Jews believe that the Messiah is simply a man. Okay, and there are many other people in various aspects that do believe that Jesus is the Messiah. They also agree that Jesus is a man. However, there's something here that I would argue that proves against that. And this is kind of beginning a segue into my second video. But there's something missing here. And you may remember in the New Testament where angels are being worshipped, and the angel says, "Do not do it. Do not worship me." And they say something along the lines of, I am a servant of the Most High, just like yourself. Don't worship me, worship God. And there's some other places in the Bible where worship to certain things seem to be allowed, like the Malach Elohim, or the Malach Yehovah, which is Malach is the word for messenger, but it's also commonly translated as angel. In fact, it's mostly translated angel. But at the place where Samson's birth is declared to his parents, the Malach, the messenger, goes up into the flame, and they are, creating, doing an altar sacrifice. And their belief after the fact is, we shall die, for we have seen God. So their belief was that they had seen God, but Jesus himself is worshipped, and I know that there's some contention here, but just for the sake of this video, they bow down, and they are worshiping him there. Thomas, he says, "My God and my King," if I'm not mistaken. But also the messenger that goes before Joshua and says, "Take off your shoes, you are standing on holy ground." That was the Malach Adonai, the Malach Yehovah, the messenger of God. And he was worshipped. So, in this particular verse, the reason I'm saying all of this is because in the part that's missing, it talks about, this is widely known to be a messianic verse, by the way. And you can see the big difference here between this one that uses Masoretic text only versus these that are corrected with other versions. And I'm going to get into this here in a minute. But let's go down here to the LXX. "Rejoice, you heavens, with him, and let all of the angels of God worship him." And again, I was saying that this is widely believed to be a messianic passage. See that I am he. This is interesting. I'm not planning on getting into this, but is this where it says, let's see, no, the ani who, I am, ego e me, I bet you is what this says. Ego e me, behold. So we'll save that for next week. But next week, whenever I get to do this other video. But I am he, and there is no God besides me. I put to death, and I make alive. I have wounded, and I heal. And from my hand no one delivers. For I lift my hand to the heavens, and shall say, as I live forever, if I have sharpened my flashing sword, and my hand takes hold on judgment, I shall return vengeance to my enemies, and repay those who hate me. I make my arrows drunk with blood, and my sword devours flesh, with the blood of the slain and the captives. From the long-haired enemy chiefs, O nations, acclaim his people, for he avenges the blood of his servants, and returns vengeance to his adversaries, and shall pardon his land, his people. Okay, so it's interesting here that we were looking at it. Let's go back down here. Oh, did I miss the verse? Where's it at? O nations. Yeah, and let all the angels of God worship him. Okay. So, Messiah, if he's a man, I don't believe the angels of God would be worshiping him. That's my opinion. Okay. But still, regardless of what you believe in that, we do have a large chunk of the verse that is missing here. You can see here in the Hebrew, this goes on, Kol b'nei Elohim, let all of the angels, this goes again to when I was talking about the b'nei Elohim, and I think the Dead Sea Scrolls, if we were to look at it, it actually says all Elohim. And if you're familiar with Heiser's Unseen Realm, he talks about the divine council, and I may get into that in the next video, but just know that when it talks about all of the sons of God or all of the gods, it's referring to the divine council. So the purpose of this video is not to show or go into any explanation on that, but I will go ahead and show the Dead Sea Scrolls thing that I have here where it says Kol Elohim here. And this is the fragment from that particular Dead Sea Scroll for Deuteronomy. I didn't show this before. I'll show it to you real quick. This is, you can see here there's a watermark. And I got this from Nehemiah Gordon. He has something about some documents that he found from a Vatican junk box of texts. And I got this, and this is part of the gospel. I believe it's the Gospel of John. I don't have the beginning of it here, but the parts that I'm able to read, I can see that it says, this is the word for virgin. Let's see, and the man that's named Joseph from the house of David, and the name of the Betula, the virgin, is Mary. And this is the actual Hebrew version that the Vatican had, that it didn't know how to or where to put it, so it just put it in what they called the junk box, which is just various texts. All right, so I believe I have one left, and hopefully I've done a good job here at explaining what's going on here. I'm not going to make any conclusions necessarily, but I just want people to understand that the authoritative version that a lot of versions of the English translations, rather, of the Bible use and solely use, in my opinion, have some iffy places in them. And this is why when you look at a verse in the New Testament and you go to find it in the Old, that's why they don't match. And a lot of people believe that when they're quoting the New Testament, they're using the Septuagint. That may be the case, but again, we don't remember, or we don't know, rather, or at least I don't know. And this is just Brian's ignorant conclusions. But could they be using a much older Hebrew that was available to them then, but is not now? Because again, remember, the Masoretic Text didn't come around until the 10th century, 1,000 years. So the time that some of the New Testament was being written was pretty contemporary to that. So anyway, we're going to get to this last verse and somehow figure out how to end this video. And if you are one of the people that have stuck around for 100 minutes, then congratulations. Please let me know, and I will congratulate you. And thank you for listening, and hopefully this has been beneficial in some way or another. So Isaiah 61, and if you're familiar with this verse, you know that we got to start, or you know where this is from. It's going to be from Luke, right? And so in Luke, Yeshua, Jesus, he stands up, as is the custom in synagogue, to read, and the scroll of Isaiah was handed to him. So it says, and he came to Nazareth where he'd been brought up, and according to his practice he went into the congregation on the Sabbath day, and he stood up to read. And the scroll of the prophet Isaiah, this is Isaiah, was handed to him, and having unrolled the scroll, he found the place where it was written. Let's click on it. Isaiah 61, no doubt about it, right? The Spirit of Yahweh is upon me, because he has anointed me to bring the good news to the poor. He has sent me to heal the brokenhearted, to proclaim release to the captives and recovery of sight to the blind, to send away crushed ones with a release, to proclaim the acceptable year of Yahweh. And having rolled up the scroll, he gave it back to the attendant and sat down, and all the eyes of the congregation were fixed upon him. And he began to say to them, today the scripture is fulfilled in your hearing. I want to look at this really quick. Okay. I'm going to click on verse 20. I'm going to click on this because it will show me the Greek. All the eyes of the synagogue. Okay. So it's not congregation. I was curious if this word was something else. But yeah, so now let's go back to Isaiah. And I want you to understand there's going to be something here, right? So we've got heal the brokenhearted, proclaim release to the captives, recover the sight to the blind, send away the crushed ones with release. Let's go back and read Isaiah. Isaiah 61. The Spirit of Master Yahweh is upon me, because Yahweh has appointed me to bring good news to the meek. He has sent me to bind up the brokenhearted, to proclaim release to the captives, and the opening up of the prison to those who are bound, to proclaim the acceptable year of Yahweh. And this is where Yeshua, Jesus, stops, right? Because from here, this is something else. He didn't come, and I'm not going to spend too much time on this, but he didn't come to fulfill this part just yet, okay? He came to fulfill the part above, because he stops right there and he says, this has been fulfilled in your hearing. What an event to be present. Jesus stands up and says, I am fulfilling the scripture in your hearing. I am the fulfillment of this scripture in your hearing. So if you were paying attention, one of these was missing. And I think it's interesting, the one that's missing. And I'm not going to spend a whole lot of time talking about why I think it's interesting, because I may get into that a little bit more next time. But what's missing here is, if we click on compare, we'll see that what's missing is the healing of the blind, the recovery of the sight of the blind. That is not in the Masoretic text. So let's go back to compare. Let's come back down here. And let's see. And it looks like it might be related to what this is. My Hebrew is not good enough to be able to tell you just right off the top of my head what that is. But you can see the difference here is where this is one particular word, and this is different. As well as this being put into two words. And I don't know what the significance of that is, but essentially you've got and recovery of the sight to the blind, and that's missing completely from the Masoretic text. And I think it's interesting, out of all of these, that the one that is miraculous, because these all are obviously they're traits of Jesus in his first coming, right? But the one that's missing is the one that, I would suggest is miraculous. The recovery of the sight to the blind. He healed people of their blindness, and not just spiritual blindness, but physically their blindness. All right. So I talked for a really long time. I went through a lot of different verses. I showed you some screenshots. We went into a lot of different quotes here from various books. I hope this was beneficial to you. Again, I am not trying to put the Bible in any kind of negative light at all. What I'm merely trying to do is show that there's a reason that some of this stuff might be missing, and it may not and is not missing in other translations or other manuscripts. And I think it's important for us to know as Bible readers that there's a lot going on in Bible translation. It's not cut and dry, and a lot of times, in listening to this podcast that I was telling you about, I think it's called Working for the Word, maybe even. But in that podcast, he talks a lot of times about how translators have to make really difficult decisions on what to put in their translation. And oftentimes it's like, okay, well, what we're going to do is we're going to go this route, but we're going to footnote the rest of it. And I think that's really important, to have, a Bible that has a lot of good footnotes. And don't discredit them, because I know that there's some people that are very religious about particular versions of the Bible, and how only one particular version is correct, and how the rest are just awful. And they start talking about these footnotes, and the footnotes are good. And I'll be honest with you, it's hard for me not to see anything but ignorance in these type of making particular versions religious, and to me it's just out of ignorance. And it's not a. I'm not trying to be negative here. I'm just saying it's a lack of understanding and knowledge. And I'll be honest with you, I'm ignorant about a lot of things, and it's I'm trying to remove some of that ignorance, and that's what we're supposed to be doing, removing ignorance. The more we know, right? So hopefully this will benefit those of you that have made it through 110 minutes here. 110 minutes. If it has, and please let me know. It's great to hear things like that, and I'd like to think that I made this for somebody somewhere to get benefit, be blessed from it. But for now, like I said, I'm hopefully going to be able to create another one here soon that, in my opinion, will kind of spin off of this into another subject that I believe is really needed for today. And most Christians will probably be curious and not understand why I'm coming up with what I am, but there is a need for it in my particular walk, and with people that are in the same type of circles and beliefs as I am. But with that, I'm going to shut up and end this video. Thank you, and I hope this has been a blessing. Shalom.